In this fast-paced world where everything moves quickly and we're on to the next thing before we finish what we're doing, we might stop a moment and reflect on our thoughts and how they echo through time. They are not a one-and-done phenomenon. They can linger and hang around in our subconscious, waiting to surface again. Hi, I'm Beth Bonness, host of the Thought Echoes podcast. In this episode, I have a conversation with Bob Rosen, psychologist, researcher, and author of the book Detach, Ditch Your Baggage to Live a More Fulfilling Life. Bob invites us to reflect on our relationship with our attachments and provides advice on how to replace them with aspirations. I hope you enjoy this episode as you learn more about yourself. Hi, Bob.
Hey there, how are you?
I'm doing well. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to write Detach?
Sure. Well, I'm a psychologist and a businessman, and I've spent the last, I would say, 40 years studying and advising top executives around the world in some 55 countries. And I've always been interested in the whole idea of self-awareness and self-development. But my travels around the world got me very interested in Eastern and Western psychology. Western psychology is all about goals and aspirations and problem solving, and Eastern psychology is all about understanding the power of impermanence and change and uncertainty, and in fact, attachments. So I wrote the book to sort of weave those two concepts together. The other thing that was happening was that about 10 years ago, I really started to notice that people were increasingly unhappy. Actually, Gallup has done a poll that shows over the past 12 years, there's been a decline in global happiness. Also, a lot of disconnection and loneliness, mistrust and cynicism, polarization in the society, and people are, I think, are increasingly uncomfortable in their own skin. So I wanted to write a book to help people become more comfortable with themselves and to find out what was getting in the way of their own fulfillment and success. And that's why I wrote Detach.
One of the things I love about it, and there are many, and there are 10 attachments, which we're going to have to
Thank
kind
you.
of pick which ones that we try to
Sure.
highlight today. But I love the Eastern, Western kind of weaving that together because it's true. You could have taken the concept and done a filter just with the Western trying to soften up our goal-orientedness, or the Eastern philosophy and try to bring people along who aren't necessarily exposed to that or kind of, shy away from that. So the fact that you can speak both languages and integrate that to me was a delight to have you draw from that. So thank you. And as I mentioned, as I've been working on my memoir, working through various themes, the morning that I got the request to do the podcast, I had just this little epiphany, little one, because you do while you're writing and it's gold. And then 2 weeks later, it's like, well, that's not exactly right. But that morning, it was about letting go. That with all the different themes I had, it was about letting go. And then what pops up in my mail? But a request to interview you with Detach, which was just serendipitous timing. So I'm
Yeah.
delighted both to get that just in terms of me, selfishly for me, but then to be able to talk, kind of talk to you and have a conversation about all your words of wisdom, I think is wonderful.
Thank you.
When
Thank you.
I often talk about people on this Thought Echoes podcast about our relationship with our thoughts. We're so busy. You talk about being disconnected, and I think we get caught up in the doing and we don't reflect enough on the being. And our thoughts have a tendency, I'll speak for myself, but I think generally thoughts have a tendency to kind of pull us along in us in a you're being in the moment, but your thoughts are getting you in the past and in the future, and you just get all wound up. And so, can you talk about how you describe a relationship with the thoughts in terms of these attachments?
Sure. Well, many of us carry baggage from our past, and this bad baggage takes the form of stories and narratives and thought belief systems that get in the way of our fulfillment and our success and our happiness. And so what I did was I crafted the book around these 10 attachments that we hold on to, that pull us down, they sabotage us, they hijack us. And the 10 very quickly are the attachment to stability, to the past, and to the future, the attachment to control and perfection, the attachment to success, to pleasure, the attachment to youth, to yourself, and the attachment to life. And each one has an attachment, but at the other side, the Western side, is the aspiration. How do you get out of it? And how can you change these thought patterns to actually release yourself from these attachments? And that's really the heart of the book.
And each one of them, and you see the list and you go, yep, yep, yep.
Yeah,
Maybe not so much that one, yeah. And so having the 10, there was a kind of a comforting settling in terms of, okay, now you're going to walk us through what it is and the positive side rather than, we're all messed up and we've got the negative
right.
part of it because there are, as in many characteristics we have, there's a good application of it, and then there's one where you take it too far and it's not a good application. So it's learning that dance between how we might use what are some strengths that are our attachments, but knowing when we need to turn it down.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I mean, each one of these attachments is a positive, to certain extent, but at some point they become dysfunctional and negative, and that's where we have to pay attention to them. For me, I was attached to the future, and I was attached to success. I grew up in a lower middle class family, and I was always attached to pulling myself out of that community and to being successful. And so I was preoccupied with the attachment to the future and the attachment to success. So preoccupied that at some point in my life, I was setting incredibly high bars and burning out. And as a result, not as a result, but I had a bunch of surgeries and I got addicted to opiates,
Mm.
to Percocet and Vicodin. So I became attached to pleasure as a result of my attachment to the future and to success. Everybody has their own story about what their attachments are. That was mine.
It was a powerful sharing of that experience as the opioid crisis has been so prevalent throughout the
Yeah,
country. And there are probably many people I know of who are, but aren't going to talk about it, And so having
right,
somebody talk about it who's not somebody's stereotype of a drug addict,
right.
is, I think, is encouraging for other people to kind of just take a pause and
A
be okay
late
with it.
bloomer for me. And, I'm sober now for several years, but it happened late in life.
Mm,
And I didn't even drink or smoke pot. I mean, I was clean as a whistle, but it grabbed me.
mm. When we talk about thought echoes, and this gets to individually, we have these repeated thoughts. Like you said, you grew up with this attachment, and when you spend some time knowing that you go through the list and you've got questions, and so as you're going through the questions, not all of them are going to give you a little zing, but the ones that do, it's like, okay, let's just stop and look at this and kind of examine it a little bit more. And so that affects you and or each one of us as we process through. But we have these attachments, and they affect other people. So when you look at control specifically, I may be trying to control myself, whether somebody is setting a perfectionist or the goals that you had talked about, but there's a ripple effect. And so, can you talk about the control and the perfectionism one were two that rang true to me. So, would you elaborate a little bit more on those two and kind of how there are examples of how people get caught in that and then how you can balance that with the aspiration? It's
Sure.
twin.
Well, the attachment to control and the attachment to perfection is very common, and particularly around business people. Let's just look at control, for example. From early childhood, we're taught to shape our environment. We take charge, we cleverly influence and manipulate and maneuver around people to control situations and circumstances. But our determination to control bumps up against reality because we can't control a lot of what goes on in life. And we hide our vulnerability as a result. And so many people get hijacked by control. And the secret, the aspiration, is to get in touch with vulnerability, to allow yourself to recognize that you don't control everything and you let it go. Now, there are four types of control. There's people who like to control others, people who are typically controlled by others, passive aggressive people who control indirectly, and people pleasers who use their personalities to control others. But they all have to deal with their own idiosyncratic vulnerability to get out of this control. Very common among business people. They micromanage, they control their families, and they're managing their own anxiety as a result. Um, uh, the attachment to perfection is very different. It's the need to appear flawless, avoiding mistakes and weaknesses at all costs, and contract that with excellence, which is achieving high standards, but with much more flexibility and self acceptance. So, by embracing our imperfections and laughing at ourselves and getting comfortable with just life as it plays out, we're able to get rid of that attachment to perfection and to embrace imperfection and to allow ourselves to laugh at ourselves and to be human and to allow ourselves to make mistakes. Both of these work together, and they often control people and alienate people as a result.
One of the things I'm finding interesting as I interview various authors, I have two granddaughters. One has just turned a year and one's just turned 4. And
Mhm.
so I'm seeing 3 generations, my daughter and my granddaughters and myself, and envisioning uh, what my daughter has learned, lessons learned from her growing up with me, which is different than my mom, in terms of what lessons I learned. And then, of course, each parent cycle generation tries to improve on that, knowing that some things leak through, anyways. But to watch my daughter and her husband work with these two brand new human beings. And one of the things that really struck me was allowing them to express when they had big feelings. So, not always trying to put on a happy face, or when something goes wrong, say, it'll be fine, or you shouldn't be upset, and allowing it to be a more authentic
Yeah,
conversation. But the perfectionist in terms of always having good grades, being good in sports, all of that, I was not modeled that, oops, I made a mistake and life goes on. And so there has been conversations with the kids in terms of, do you have a fixed mindset or do you think you have a growth mindset? Were you open growing up to making mistakes and being open to it's being okay,
right.
because we all make mistakes, but it's the being okay or sharing it with other people, just like we didn't model conflict. We had those conversations kind of privately. And in hindsight, that isn't what better place than at home to kind of learn how your parents are struggling through with things or working through with things. And so the vulnerability piece has come up in terms of making mistakes with watching my granddaughters. And you find a conversation that when one of them does, then everybody else says, oh yeah, I tried to do, whatever it was. And so the adults are talking about their mistakes with these little people. And I just think that's very
Very
refreshing.
powerful. It's
And
very powerful. It is interesting when you grow up in a conflict averse environment. Uh, it often leads to passive aggressive behavior because it was never safe to deal with conflict openly, to express your anger. but we all feel difficult emotions like sadness and worry and anger. And it's important to experience and express them. But the really healthy people course correct very quickly into their positive emotions: hope, love, faith, forgiveness, compassion, empathy. But they experience and express the full range of their emotions. And so it is very important to get in touch. Every one of these attachments has at its base fear. And fear is probably the most fundamental emotion and very important for us to experience. Otherwise, we get stuck. So, what I did in the book was I give people a lot of questions to ask themselves. I try to cite the research that supports these attachments and the lessening of them. And I also tell stories because I think that people learn best from stories that tell the truth. Just to give one quick example, I worked with a woman, her name was Ray. She was a writer. And she openly admitted that she was a perfectionist. And one day we were in a meeting, and I said to her, Ray, and there were other people in the room, I said, Ray made a mistake, and we still love you, Ray. And she loved that. Okay, so the next time I basically said, Ray, this is not your best work. Well, she was up all night worrying about this, and finally she sent me an email, and she was absolutely right. I didn't handle it well.
Mm.
So, how we interact with perfectionists really matters because we have to be sensitive to how they see the world as well.
Mm. That's a powerful. I remember reading that story. That's a powerful story. There was an article I read recently that talked about for creativity. I think it was a quote that was attributed to Einstein, but that people should read fairy tales. And the Grimm's fairy tale versions, which are not the sweetened down version that we have in beautiful drawings, now with our kids. It talks about scary stuff. And
Yeah,
the premise is that in this fantasy world, it's a safe place for kids to be able to be scared, but it's not happening at home. And
yeah.
parents have to, watch the line of fantasy for reality. But I grew up with a very optimistic mom who could make lemonade out of, lemons anytime, which I did to a point that was toxic. It's like I wouldn't let myself or other people, I would jump too fast to, it's like, well, nobody died. And then, of course, it isn't as bad as you think it's going to be, or something will happen that, whatever. But I sucked the air out of the space around whatever person was sharing a vulnerability and a fear and a
Mhm.
hurt. And when I realized that, going back to my husband and the kids, and it's like, do I do this? Is my perception of this? And they're like, absolutely. And it's like, that was my vulnerable moment. So it that was a case where something normally viewed as positive became toxic because it was overused rather than allowing bad stuff happens and letting people process. It's not that you won't get to hope and a more positive space, but I grew up where you shouldn't even be thinking those negative thoughts because that's bad. And so jump
Yeah.
quickly to the positive stuff. So
Just a quick aside here that I think that a lot of women, and not all women act traditionally like women. They sometimes take on characteristics of men and vice versa. But a lot of women get very frustrated from their male partners because their partners oftentimes get anxious when emotions are introduced into a conversation. And as a result, because of their own frailty and vulnerability, they shut down the conversation because they don't want to deal with the emotions. And we differ tremendously in terms of how comfortable we are sharing our emotions and receiving emotions. And so it's really important that people talk about this and what their background and what their tendency is. So I think your example is a really good one.
And my husband is very open. He will say things like, "This is what I said." And so my trying to like listen to the words and said, "I'm listening to the words, but I'm watching your face and your body
Right,
language."
right.
And there's I can never cite the exact statistic, but the majority of our communication is nonverbal. And so words are the fact that he will speak very concisely in terms of what he's trying to communicate is just part of the story. And so that's been an ongoing tug of war, where it's like, I know you just said that, but all that body language around there, that's giving me conflicting information. Can you see that? Do you realize that? So there've been some juicy conversations, but yes, having a conversation.
It
Just
is
like,
interesting too that younger people between 20 and 35 are now the most stressed out generation. And midlife, that's taken the place of midlife anxiety for a variety of reasons. Searching for relationships, finances, career aspirations, not finding the right jobs, being laid off from jobs. And as a result of being so connected to the internet, we oftentimes don't learn those subtle nonverbal cues in relationships that allow us to self-assess and assess the other person. So it's very interesting. On the flip side of that, there was recently a study by Happify that showed that for the first time in history, people are looking for emotionally intelligent partners.
mm,
So there is a change in the wind that people are recognizing that it's just not good enough to share values or to share common experiences. I want somebody who's done their work,
mm,
emotionally intelligent. And I think that's a good thing. But unfortunately, a lot of young people, they're dealing with their own problems just like retirees are.
mm.
And that's why I focused on the attachment to youth because it affects all of us at different ages differently.
And attachment to life too was very,
Yeah.
and for those of us on the sunset side, of our experiences, that was I saw that one coming, but I waited a while before I got to that
Well,
one.
what's interesting about that one is that nobody teaches us about how to live and thrive in uncertainty
Mm,
because every time we breathe, the world changes. But stability is an illusion and uncertainty is reality. So we have to sort of learn how to thrive and live in uncertainty that the world is always changing. And then we have to recognize that life is about ups and downs, ebbs and flows, but no one really tells us
mm,
how to navigate through life. And so what happens is that people get upset, they have crises. And in fact, there's some research out of Sweden that says that if you're 15 to 25 and you haven't had a major life crisis, you are vulnerable
mm.
at age 50 to falling apart because we have to learn the resilience skills to fall down and get back up. And so we get attached to these various things that get in the way of our own long-term development.
That's very true. I mean, growing up, you had this kind of pace of getting married, because I got married in 80, right out of college. So you get married. There wasn't even a kind of a question. You got married and you had kids, and it wasn't the white picket fence per se. It was just this is the road that,
Yeah.
all your friends and family are on. And you deviate a little bit in terms of what career you want to go into and the early dynamics of stay-at-home mom pressure from, the conservative kind of background that I grew up in, which eventually, loosened up. But the uncertainty element, I had a sister who died when she was 3 and I was 10. And that's where whenever anybody got upset at work, I'd kind of say, nobody died. It's like to me in my 10-year-old brain, the worst thing that could happen, even though the family got closer and all of that, and that, but that was my first, to your point, having a traumatic event early that you are coached through how you get past it it's been a big, I mean, that's a pivotal moment and memory that I have that built in some of that resistance and some of that optimism.
Well,
Um,
we pathologized trauma. And don't
mm,
recognize that everybody experiences some form of trauma. That's why we have attachments to the past and
mhm,
we get stuck by old memories and relationships that don't work and business deals that went sour, rather than learning how to surrender and embrace the fear, get comfortable being uncomfortable, and then learning to forgive and let go. Doesn't mean to not it doesn't mean to forget.
mhm.
It means to forgive
And move.
and then rewrite our story. And we have that capacity as adults. So when things happen as a child, we don't always have the control to change that. And we don't have the cognitive abilities to change that. But as an adult, we have so many more talents and abilities inside our mind to rewrite our story. But people get stuck. I want to come back to one thing that we talked about, this
Mhm,
attachment to youth, because it affects older people in different ways. You know, something happens when we enter the third trimester in life, is that we have a choice. We can live our life in isolation and regret and loneliness, or we can live our life being connected to other people, searching for meaning, having a higher purpose, and the like. And we know what healthy retirees and healthy older adults do. They live healthy lifestyles. They confront their internalized ageism that we all have. In fact, 80% of people hold prejudices about older people, including themselves. They build incredible relationships. They have hobbies that they love, and they maintain a youthful personality. And the research says that when they do those things, they live 7.5 years longer than if they don't. So our attitude about our attachment to youth or to age really matters.
mm. That's great advice. Because it's true, everybody's got an example of somebody you see thriving, and it's like, I want to be like that. What are you doing? And somebody that you just feel sorry for and just compassionate that they're stuck, that they just
Yeah.
stuck. Um, we could go on forever. Can you have some advice in terms of people who either than picking, find your book, and I'll have all that contact information in the podcast notes, but in terms of how to tiptoe in to this kind of Eastern Western uh, approach to looking at our attachments and then the aspirations that go with it, how would you invite people to get started?
Well, we actually created an assessment that measures you against these 10 attachments to see which ones you're attached to. And then we take people through a process in 10 short workbooks through a 4-part process. One is, um, are you aware? Are you aware of your inner self? What's going on? What are the stories you tell? And your outer self, which is your perceptions of external reality. The second step is, what are you attached to and what are the fears underneath that attachment? The third one is, what's a picture of your desired state? What's your aspiration? What are you trying to create? And then an action step. The fourth one, what are you going to do about it? The behaviors. And so between self-assessment and this 4-part process, people can really change their behavior. I'm convinced of it. I know I've lived by this, and I see my friends who are living by this, and that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book. I just want to help people live a better life.
That's beautiful. And even for somebody who doesn't want to have the time to go through that process, I think that the little teasers in terms of look at that list, which one speaks to you, and just
Yeah.
go tip your toe and look at the conversation that you invite people to have. And then from that, I think the appetite for learning more becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy to some extent. So it's been a delight. And like I said, the timing was perfect. The timing was perfect to receive this book from you. So, what else are you doing next now that you've been working on? I mean, you've got the book out in the world, and so your private practice. You still working with people in terms of that four-step process that you've got?
I'm giving speeches and I tried to productize the learning process. We also have a book club guide so
Mm.
people can talk to each other and read the book and go through it. So between the assessment and the workbooks and the book club guide and the book, I'm hoping that that's going to be enough for a while. And Otherwise, I go to Mexico for 3 months in Puerto Vallarta with my husband.
Woo,
We have a wonderful
lovely,
time there,
lovely.
and I'm enjoying my partial retirement.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much, Bob, for taking the time. I'm
My
looking
pleasure,
forward
Beth.
to the conversation that we have online too, as more people learn about you. So thank you so
Sure.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of the Thought Echoes podcast, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing with a friend. It helps get the word out. Until next time, keep exploring the echoes that shape your world.